The second critical response occurs when white plays e5, and here, if you remember my previous video, I recommend that you should play d6, and the most aggressive reply here by white is bishop to b4. Afterwards, I recommend that black should capture this pawn, and after knight cross e5, black should play queen to d5. Now in that video I have covered most of the usual response except two moves, which is queen to e2 and queen to h5 checks, and these both are very critical move. So let's deal each by turn. First of all, let's consider queen to e2. So idea of white is very simple. Not only white is protecting both the piece, but white wants to play knight to c3, gaining more time on the queen. Well, if this kind of ideas are successful against the Colorado Gambit, then nobody would like to play Colorado Gambit. But fortunately for us, black has a very strong move at this position, and that is queen cross b2. And after rook to f1, because the queen to h5 check is looming, black has to play knight to f6. Now here I have two games for you. In one of my game, my opponent decided to capture this knight, so knight cross knight, and after b cross c6, white has managed to give black a double pawn and stopping black to castle on the queen side. Well, that's the downside. The plus side is now the planning of the campaign from the black perspective is very easy. So after bishop to a4, I switch my plan and I now decided to go on the king side. So I played e6, and here my opponent responded with the move d4, free up his other bishop, and I can play bishop to d6 at this point, but I decided to first grab a semi-open file with my rook. So I played rook to b8, and now my opponent responded with bishop to b3. Its idea is to attack the loose e6 pawn, which is weaker right now. After a long thinking, I come out with a very cunning move, which is knight to d5. And at first sight it looks like a mistake, because can't white kick this knight with the move c4? But believe it or not, this is what exactly black was hoping for. After c4, I played a very strong move, which is bishop to b4 check. And the first merit is white cannot play knight to c3. In the game, my opponent responded with bishop to d2, but now comes the whole point of knight to d5, because now I can play knight to f4. And because this bishop is pinned right now, this knight is attacking the queen. So in the game, my opponent responded with queen to e3, but afterwards I played another strong move, which is queen to g4. So now the idea is very simple. I want to play knight to g2 check and forking king and a queen, and unfortunately for white, white cannot move the queen, because if the queen moves to anywhere, then queen to e2 will lead to checkmate. So again here, after a long thinking, my opponent come out with the only strong move, which is f3, but afterwards black has a winning position. So I simply played knight to g2 check, and after king to e2, I just capture the queen, and after white recapture the queen, I just capture the rook, and after bishop takes bishop and rook takes bishop, if you look at this position, clear exchange up. So that is one game which highlight how you can play against knight cross c6 variation. In another game, my opponent come out with this move, which is the move d4, which is a more stable move. But against this, black planning of campaign will be remain same. So black wants to quickly develop the queen side and go through the queen side castling. So I played bishop to d7, which has a cunning idea of capturing the knight. So my opponent responded with knight cross d7, and here I played a stronger move, which is knight cross d7. Right now indeed black is threatening to capture the d pawn, and in one of my game my opponent played the very passive looking move c3. Afterwards I simply castle on the queen side, and on the very next move I played e5, and because white king is stuck in the center, white is having a very hard time. So that is the idea if your opponent plays a passive move such as c3. In another game where my opponent was a high rated, so he decided to go through the attack, so he played bishop to f4. attacking the c7, and probably he thought that I cannot capture the d4 pawn, but to his horror I indeed capture this pawn. At first sight it looks very dangerous because white goes for this line, so he capture my knight, which allows my king come into the center, so king cross d7, and afterwards he played queen to d3, pinning the knight, and probably he didn't think beyond on this. But here comes the whole thing, because I know that he's going for this and I have something surprise for him. So I played queen to e4 check, and please note, if the king moves, then I will capture the white queen. That way white pawn will be all over the place, so my opponent has to capture this queen, and after I recapture, right now black is threatening to capture on c2, so my opponent has to play moves such as knight to a3, which is not at all a bad move because it looks passive at first sight, but idea of white is very simple. White wants to castle on the queen side, and then this knight will be pinned. So that's why I have to play very accurate moves over here. Here I played a strong move, which is knight to f3 check, so stopping any queenside castling, and my opponent responded with king to e2. Afterwards I simply play e5, and after rook check, which looks very natural, but it's not a good move because I played king to c6, and king to c6 probably the strongest move of the game because it's stopping knight coming to the b4 and also stopping rook coming to the d4. Moreover, white has to move this bishop right now. So in the game my opponent plays bishop to e3. Afterwards I simply snap up the knight, and after white recapture I played rook to d8, and we do not need to go further from here. Look at the white pawns, they are all over the place. Black has a compact pawn structure, and black is also a 2 pawn ahead. Those are the two games which give you insight what you should do when your opponent plays queen to a2. The second critical line occurs when white give this check with queen to h5, and here black has to respond with the g6, and after knight cross g6, the most natural looking move knight to f6 leads to disaster. So please remember this idea, never play knight to f6 in this variation. I'll show you what happens when you play knight to f6, because after knight to f6 white has a very strong move, which is knight to f5. So not only giving a check to the black king, but also attacking the black queen. So black response is pretty much forced. Black has to capture this queen. Afterwards white will recapture the queen, and not only white is a clear pawn up at this point, but white has also idea of capturing the c7, so probably black has to move the king, and if white wishes, white can also give black a double pawn. In those circumstances white will be the one who is the boss of the game. So that's why I don't recommend knight to f6 at this point. Instead of this, black has a very strong move, which is queen to e4 check. This is a very crucial point because white king can only go to the f1, because if the king goes to the d1, that was a couple of times happened in one of my games, then the very simple will be, now you play knight to f6, and now queen has two places to go. In either cases white will lose the game. So let's see each by turn. So if the queen goes to the h3, then the very simple will be f4, and if the queen goes to the h4, then the very simple will be queen cross g2, which has a merit of attacking both the piece. And if the knight captures rook, queen captures rook, comes with a check, and after king to e2, black can simply snap up the bishop. So that is one game which highlight what you should do when your opponent plays king to d1. So most critical response over here will be king to f1. Afterwards black has to play knight to f6, and here white has the only strong move, which is queen to h4. And here comes the big surprise to your opponent, because we are going to do the exchange sacrifice with h cross g6. At first sight it doesn't look like it has enough compensation, but the whole idea is black will do a rapid fast development where white all pieces are slipping. So let's see some of my games from here onwards. I have two games here for you. In both the games my opponent captured the rook, and afterwards I just goes for this forcing sequence. So I played queen cross c2, and after very natural knight to c3, I played bishop to d7. The idea is very simple. I want to castle on the queen side and quickly go for the attack. In one of my game, my opponent plays the move g3. Afterwards, I simply play a6, attacking the bishop. So bishop drop backs to the a4. I give white this check, so queen to d3 check, and after very nature looking king to g2, which free up that rook, I just castle on the queen side. And in the game, my opponent decided to activate his rook as quickly as possible, so he played rook to e1. But this is a one kind of disaster happens when you play passive, and here I played the exceptionally strong move, which is knight to b4. Knight to b4 has a clear idea to put knight on c2. So in the game, my opponent decided to defend the threat with bishop to b3, but afterwards I simply play bishop to c6 check, and after king to g1 I simply play queen to f3, and white is hard pressed to stop the mate. Now in the second game, instead of g3 at this point, my opponent has analyzed this line with the help of engine, and he come out with this two exceptionally strong queen moves, which is first of all queen to h4, and after I castle on the queen side, he played queen to a4. So I think this is probably the strongest line in this e5 variation, and you have to know what to do against this in case your opponent study this line with the engine. Here black response is pretty much forced. Black has to capture this queen, and after white recapture, black has to play this space gaining move, which is e4. So right now if you look at the position, black is a clear exchange down, but black has a center, and black pieces are more active than the white pieces. Moreover, white has a loose pawn on d2. So let's see how the game progress. So here my opponent plays the move d3, which has a merit of free up that bishop. I continue with the knight to b4, so attacking the bishop and also attacking the d3. First of all, my opponent free up his bishop with bishop to g5, attacking my knight, and I simply defend it with bishop to g7, and now he play rook to d1. But after very simple bishop captures and knight captures, I just snap up that pawn, and after king to e2, I simply played e4. So now it's a matter of whose position is better. White has the exchange, but black has a one pawn plus a centralized knight. In the game, my opponent decided to play rook to d2. Afterwards, I played rook to e8, which has an idea of first of all free up this knight, which was pinned, and the second idea is after black plays the move b5 and the knight moves, there are some tactics looming based on this b2 square. Seeing all this, my opponent plays the move b3, but my opponent's last move b3, it's a big tactical blunder, because I simply play the move b5 attacking the knight, and after knight drop backs to the b2, I simply played knight to h7, and you can see right now two pieces are hanging and white cannot defend both the pieces. So in the game, my opponent decided to capture my knight, but after very simple pawn captures comes with a check, my opponent has to grab the pawn, and that allows me to capture another piece. So I played knight cross bishop, and now you can see black has two pieces against the rook, and still you think black is not that much fine, but this position is more dangerous than it looks. In the game, my opponent decided to play h4 attacking my knight, so I played my knight to the e4 attacking his rook, and the rook goes to the e2, so pinning my knight, but I can easily unpin this, so I give this check, so rook to d8 check, and after king to c2, I played this wonderful move, which is rook to d6. Here probably my opponent was in time trouble, so he played the move f3, which allow me to finish the game very quickly. So I played rook to c6 attacking the king, and please note, if the king goes to the d3, then the rook to c3 will be a checkmate. So in the game, my opponent decided to play king to b1, but after very simple knight to c3 check and king to c2, my opponent doesn't have anything, only to resign the game. So that is one game which give you a very good idea how to handle queen to h4 check.